with Greg Voros, our repair shop foreman. Today, August 13, 2021, we are broadcasting from upstairs on the third floor because there's filming going on with a crew downstairs on the second floor, taking up our normal location. Hopefully, the internet connection here will be good enough. If it fails, we'll be back to see you August 27th, because next week we will not be doing a question and answer session. We've had things come up that we will be very occupied next week, but all is good so far as business. And at any rate, we have a few questions that have come in today, but we have room for plenty more. So if any of you have questions, by all means, send them on in, and we'll do our best to get to all of them. But we can start with one that's actually right up Greg's line from Jeffrey.
Excuse me. Jeffrey asks, does the type of metal used for the frets on an acoustic guitar make a difference in sound quality? I have never heard or seen any reference as to the type of metal used for the frets on an acoustic instrument when it's described. However, I do believe that the kind of wood used for the neck of the guitar does make a difference. It's a great question. It all makes a difference. The type of wood, the construction of the instrument, and yes, the fret wire makes a difference as well, sound-wise. The fret wire, I don't think it makes a difference, but not any more than the type of strings you're going to use as well. So there's a little tonal differences, and I could see that. But it's like I said, it's not any more or less than the strings would change your sound just a little bit. The one thing I would add to it is knowing what kind of frets you have has some to do with what kind of strings you should be using. So, for instance, there's a couple of manufacturers out there. Very specifically, they have different strings in their lineup. But D'Addario, for instance, has the NYXL set, and that set is made to use with a stainless steel fret. A lot of folks don't really realize that because it's a steel string. So if you were to use that on modern nickel frets, you would tear that fret up pretty fast. I mean, I noticed it myself after I do a complete refret. I could string it up with some NYXLs, and within a few days, I could see where the steel cuts that nickel. And that's the one thing I would say is to be mindful for what kind of frets you have and what kind of strings should go along with them. In the big picture, not using a steel string on nickel frets.
Conversely, I would think that if you have the stainless steel frets, some types of strings won't wear well.
That's right, because you will wear the strings out. So it's one of those things. A lot of folks say that if as soon as you get stainless steel frets installed on your instrument, then they last a long time, which is true. But then you're going to go through strings quite a bit faster because they'll just really kill your strings. So knowing what kind of fret wire you have and what kind of strings you're going to use is pretty important.
And of course, the type of wood that the neck is made of does matter,
Sure.
But it also matters what kind of reinforcement is in that neck. For example, if you have a graphite rod, that's going to give a different tonality to the instrument and to the neck than if you have a steel T-bar in the neck, and that's going to be somewhat different in sound from a neck that has an adjustable rod. And Martin tried on the Modern Deluxe having a titanium rod.
That's right.
And that also doesn't sound the same as having a T-bar or a steel adjustable rod.
That's right. So
almost anything that you change on a guitar, it's all interconnected, and there are so many variables: the type of string, the type of fret wire, the type of wood, the thickness of the neck. Martin made in mid-1930s, their necks were quite hefty. Not only were they 1 3/4 inches at the nut, versus some of the later ones that are 1 11/16, but the contour of the neck is very different. And the necks that they made with the 1 3/4 nut in the 30s are quite different in contour.
Sir.
So it makes a huge difference. Now, the necks that have more bulk typically are the ones that I happen to like the best. So the real slim, fast action neck may not be the best sounding neck. And so many different styles of music, so many different types, players have different touch that you could go on and on and on.
Yeah.
There's one question from Nick. What is your opinion of Maton guitars? Tommy Emmanuel uses them, and I wonder why he likes them so much, other than they are made in Australia. Well, I think one thing is they are made in Australia, and he knows the people who make them, and they will make them very much to his specs, and he likes the feel of them. But also, the Maton guitars are instruments that he plays plugged in, and they have great electronics. Acoustically, do I think Maton is the ultimate guitar? My one-word answer is no, but they play physically just great.
They do.
And they're well balanced in volume. Their intonation is good, and their electronics are some of the best.
They really are.
They have a microphone and a pickup that are very, very well adapted to the guitar. And Tommy is playing acoustic electric music. Tommy is also a very good straight acoustic player.
He really is.
And when he plays strictly acoustic, often enough he's playing on a Martin or other such guitar. I think that I'm not sure if he has it's either a pre-war or Preston Thompson that he has, but he has other guitars.
Sure, sure.
And so he's not playing strictly on Maton guitars. On stage, it is almost exclusively Maton when he does his regular show. But when he went on the road with Jerry Douglas, he was playing a fair amount on Beard round neck resonator guitars, while Jerry was playing a square neck Beard resonator guitar. And Tommy has done some recording that I know of recently using one of the Gruhn design 12 fret quadruple O rosewood guitars with an Adirondack spruce top. Tommy is a great player, and he's able to get great tone out of almost anything.
Maton, it seems to me, it's one of those instruments that is built around their electronics package. There's a tremendous amount of effort that was put into that. Cole Clark's are the same way. We carry those in-house, and those instruments are very much like Maton's. They're built in Australia, so they're, they have a similar feel and look and in general. But I've noticed that about Cole Clark's as well, is that they're really made for amplified playing on stage, and that's number one. That was their focus, I think, from minute number one. I think Maton's are the same, where they play incredible and they sound very good, but they really shine when you plug them in.
Now, Martin Roberts says, what is your opinion of making guitars from black walnut? Any vintage guitars made from black walnut that stand out? I'm drying 3 trees worth of boards. Well, actually, there are vintage guitars made out of walnut by Orville Gibson and by the early Gibson company, stuff generally before 1907 or 8. A lot of that was walnut back sides and neck. And Epiphone made quite a few walnut guitars. Back in the 1930s, some of their arch tops as well as some of their flat tops had walnut neck, back, and sides. And Martin has made some walnut guitars when they were doing D16s. Before the technology series, they had walnut tobacco inside, some with ash, some with Indian rosewood, some with mahogany. They did a variety, and walnut has been used also on some of the Gruhn model electric guitars for necks and backs. So actually walnut is quite good. It's structurally good, it's attractive, and it sounds, I guess, how would one classify that? It's hard to describe sound verbally, but it sounds almost like a cross between maple and mahogany.
There you go. It would be tough to say because on the Gruhn electric models, it's amplified. I'm trying to think back when it would have been on an acoustic guitar. The early Orvals wouldn't have been tone machines.
No, but the ones I've seen, Epiphones, even right on up to Epiphone Triumph models that were walnut back in the 30s, and they were good guitars. Right. So it is absolutely possible to make a fine quality guitar out of walnut. I know that Paul Beard said it when he was using it on the Gruhn models, that the biggest problem he has was getting uniform quality in walnut. His supplier was not as consistent as his supplier of mahogany. Mahogany tends to have very predictable, very regular straight grain, and it's hard to get walnut with as uniform grain. And he said he found it walnut was more prone to having some pitch pockets or other defects. But when you get good quality walnut, it's fine stuff. Barry Copeland says a cousin has an earlier Fender Telecaster, early 50s. He believes maybe one of the so-called Nocasters. In fact, he had the guitar in your shop in the past and believes it dates to circa 51. Well, can you tell us anything about the backstory behind the Nocaster and why these guitars are so rare and valuable? Well, if it has a decal that's original that says Telecaster, then by definition, it's not a Nocaster, because Fender made the Broadcaster model starting in 1950. Not long after, they got a cease and desist letter from the attorney for Gretsch saying that they had a Broadcaster line of drums and banjos, and they felt this was a overlap infringement. They spelled Broadcaster with a K instead of a C, but still, it was not worth the effort for Fender to go to a lawsuit. Therefore, they simply took scissors and clipped the name Broadcaster off of the decals and had some that just said Fender until they came up with a new name a few months later of Telecaster. So for a few months, they made guitars that just said Fender, and people today call them a Nocaster. In fact, they had no model name for a while. And Fender didn't call them Nocasters, but that was the popular name for that. But again, if the guitar in question has a Telecaster decal that is factory applied original, then by definition, it's not a Nocaster. And
there's another question over here from Chuck Jones. I have a 1962 Rickenbacker Combo 450. It's all original, but the bridge pickup is dead. Would you advise having the original pickup rework, rewound, or replacing them with new Rick pickups? I would have a professional rewind the original pickup every single time. But be sure that you take it to a person that's used to working on vintage instruments and for the most part specializes in rewinding vintage pickups. We do that in-house. I don't know very many other places that rewind. Seymour Duncan will do it as well.
Mahler will do.
Well, they'll do it, and I'm sure they'll do a beautiful job. But the difference between a vintage shop and a pickup maker is we'll do it to spec, perfect spec, and how it would have been, including how we dip it and all of the little finite little details we pay attention to. And I'm sure those guys would as well. I would inquire about that before having anybody do the work.
But certainly there are others who do that.
Absolutely.
But in general, we would recommend having an expert rewind a pickup rather than putting in brand new pickups.
Yeah, makes a difference.
John Parsons says, I was reading the recent Guitar Player magazine with the story of the George Harrison Bangladesh concert. It mentions Harrison's use of harp-tone acoustic guitars and spoke of him passing them around to his friends. I had never heard of them. Were they good guitars for that time? Well, Sam Kuntz designed them for harp-tone. Harp-tone's real specialty with making guitar cases. The harp-tone guitars I've seen, in my opinion, were okay, but not really great guitars. But on stage, with a pickup or with a microphone shoved 3 inches from them, they worked fine. And the other thing to keep in mind is the Beatles, as great as they were, did not necessarily always use the greatest instruments. The instruments they had were things that, for the most part, they got new, not vintage. The Hofner bass was hardly equivalent to some of the American basses. Later, McCartney played a Rickenbacker bass quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the original Hofner was a short scale, hollow bass. Our experience with Hofners is typically after a few years, they need quite a bit of work to put them back in playing order. The necks frequently pull loose and need to be reset. And I don't view them as the finest basses ever made. But even a mediocre instrument in the right hands can do amazing things.
Oh, yeah.
We will certainly acknowledge the Beatles as one of the most amazing musical groups in my lifetime and probably historically ever. And some of the finest music in the world has been made on instruments that I would not consider collectible or even prime quality. But if you get an instrumentalist who is superb, the instrumentalist is more important than the instrument.
That's right. What's interesting is I totally agree, 100% agree. And what I always remember, and I remind the thing that I always remember is that classic rock, some of the greatest classic rock albums, songs that were made at that time were actually made using new instruments that were made in the 1970s. And that's something that I keep in mind all the time, from the Eagles to all the classic rock bands you can think of. They were in large part using new instruments that came out at the time.
And not all of them.
Not all of them, but
Clapton played vintage
very
instruments.
true. And there's always
Crosby, Stills, Nash
sure.
and Young played vintage instruments.
Sure. But there was many that toured with and recorded with what was new at the time. You know?
Yeah.
And
Bloomfield played vintage.
Sure, you know.
But still, some of the greatest music, some of the best-selling music ever was indeed recorded on instruments that were new. And when Clarence White was playing the Byrds, you know, a lot of that stuff was recorded on instruments. Clarence played a 1950s D18, but when he played electric, it wasn't vintage.
No.
On the other hand, some of that stuff was old enough that the instruments of that day were pretty darn good.
Right.
But when you get into the 70s, the quality of the instruments was not so good.
No.
But really, the quality of instruments as recently as 1965, early in the year, was still very good.
Absolutely.
There was an incredible downhill trajectory of quality from after the first quarter of 65 through the first quarter of 1970. That's when quality, in my opinion, absolutely went to hell in a handbasket. It was unbelievable how bad and how quickly it deteriorated. When Ted McCarty left Gibson and they replaced him with a bean counter, things went to hell fast. And when Leo Fender was gone and CBS took over and put bean counters in charge, again, quality went way down.
That seemed to be a trend in quite a few fields, even in the automotive world. Same thing with cars and other. I think it's a manufacturing thing at that point. Most folks saw that in the 1970s wasn't the greatest decade. You know?
Well, big corporate entities were taking over companies that had been run by people who started them with a passion for what they were doing. and they were replaced by people who were bean counters, and that makes a huge difference. Ronnie Mason to panelists, when did Harmony stop using Adirondack red spruce? I don't know that they ever used it.
I'm not sure either.
But certainly the after World War II stuff was Sitka, and the quality of Harmony construction is such that for the most part, it wouldn't make a bleeping bit of difference whether they used Adirondack or Sitka. They were built too heavy, the braces were too heavy, the necks were poorly constructed, the dovetail joints didn't fit well so that the action would go to heck. It was not a matter of great significance, but the post-World War II harmonies, the really huge mass production harmony guitars that people see today are Sitka spruce. Danny Price asks, what are our thoughts on Taylor versus Martin? And it's sort of like comparing apples to pineapples. They're not similar.
Right.
Taylor guitars are meticulously crafted, but they are a great deal of machine work, and they are designed to be played or playable by people who play electric guitar as well as acoustic, and want a feel of the neck and action height that's virtually like an electric. And probably 95% plus of the Taylor guitars are shipped with factory installed electronics.
That's right.
Whereas with Martin, the vast majority are shipped as straight acoustic. They're different beasts with a different clientele. There's some overlap in clientele, but frankly, the ones who are really fond of one or the other generally play different type music, have a different approach to the instrument, and it's not a matter of good versus bad. The workmanship on both is extremely good.
Absolutely.
And the factory tooling at Taylor is such that I cannot think of a single factory making guitars anywhere on planet Earth that's better tooled up, better organized than Taylor.
Agreed. Agreed. I'm a fan of both. I'm a fan of both instruments. If I were to record in a studio, I'd use a Martin, and if I were to tour on stage all over the country, I'd probably use a Taylor.
I'm a big fan of Martins.
Agreed.
But nobody's ever really paid me to play one. My lifetime earnings to date is exactly up to $49 from 1963 to the present on 8 occasions that collectively add up to that. So I've made less than $1 a year playing music.
That's right.
So, but I'm a big fan of Martin guitars, both vintage and new. And I can say that the new Martins are the best they've made in at least the last 60 years. But I can also say that the new Taylors are the best that they've ever made in the history of their company,
Absolutely.
which goes back to 74.
Absolutely.
The quality of guitars being made today is better than it was 50 years ago. And Steve Greenberg says, I've only heard George bestow the title good or very good on two better instruments. Can you ask him which guitars he would describe as excellent or finest made? Well,
golden period, maybe?
The golden era for Martin guitars, in my opinion, when the best ones were developed and introduced, and also some of the best ever for sound and were from 1927 through late 1938. However, the new ones made right now are starting to approach some of that. And the new custom order things that we get from Martin are extraordinarily good guitars, to the point where I think they're the best sounding new Martins made in my lifetime. And I was born, coming up soon, August 21st, but it's 1945. So I'll be 76 years old this month. And I can truthfully say that, at least in my own personal opinion, Some of the best guitars Martin's ever made in my lifetime are being made right now. And the best Taylor guitars ever made in the lifetime of a Taylor company, I believe, are being made right now. And there are numerous other makers doing better work now than they did 50 years ago. Gibson and Fender and others, but keep in mind that 50 years ago was 1971, which was not a golden era for instrument manufacturing, which leads us into a new topic. And that is, Greg's been with me for how many years now?
16 years?
16.
Yeah, 16.
You've seen considerable evolution in those 16 years on how we approach repair.
Oh my God.
But you've also seen, not only heard stories about, but you've seen the type of work that was done 50 years ago,
Absolutely.
60 and even 70 years ago, so far as repair. Because while you may have only personally experienced doing repair at Gruhn for 16 years, the physical evidence of the repairs that were done in the past are right there.
Yeah.
You can
It's always
see
there, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't go away. In fact, you guys upstairs spend probably more than 50% of your time working to undo
That's right.
the damage of the previous repairs.
That's right.
If the state of repair had not changed from 1970 to the present, or we can even say starting from 1950 or 60, the repairs done from 1950 through 1960 are some of the most horrific abominations ever. There wasn't so much evidence of repair work in the 1930s and 40s because the golden era acoustics weren't yet old enough to need much repair.
That's right.
And if they did, they probably sent it back to Martin or
Right.
Gibson.
And the repairs that, for sure, and the repairs that, we're making mention of is maintenance related repairs. So it's not to say that an instrument fell off a truck and it was broken into a million pieces. That's some sort of wizardry that we can get into. But
even then, they didn't have the ability to do that.
Right. But with regards to an instrument that was made in 1935, that wouldn't have needed a neck reset till at some point just prior to 1970. So all of the repairs that we're making mention of are to be maintenance related, whether it be refrets, making nuts and saddles, loose braces, bridge plate repair work on flat tops, so on and so forth. And that's something that we've definitely noticed over the years. When I first started with you, George, well, when I first got into this business 22 years ago, coming up, I quickly saw, who was doing what. And it immediately hit me in that the vast majority of repair folks were really focused on the 5% skill set with regards to work, the setups, the basic fret dresses, so on and so forth. And it's not until you had some sort of skill or some sort of training that you even got into these big repairs. This was 20 some odd years ago. But it was a much different story back in 50 years ago, back in the 1970s, where in 69 and 1970, say Martin's official position with regards to a neck reset was
that you couldn't do it.
right.
A dovetail joint was forever. I even saw a letter written from Martin to one of our customers that it was impossible to remove a neck from a Martin guitar because a dovetail joint, once done, is permanent and cannot be undone.
That's right. And that's why, in many ways, Randy Wood, for a repair person like myself, I'm also kind of a history buff with regards to different repair folks that came before me. Randy Wood is we hold him in very high regard with regards to what he did. He was in my eyes, he was one of the very first few folks that decided to say, hey, listen, this is a dovetailed joint, and I think that I can have access to that joint and get some hot water in there, and I can figure it out to where how it could somehow dissolve that glue and the neck could come back out and he was already thinking about these things. So that was
He was thinking and doing it.
that's right.
Although the method that he used is one we certainly wouldn't do today.
No, not at all. But I still have tremendous respect for what he tried to do.
He did it.
He did.
And frankly, his results were not nearly as good as we can do today,
Right.
and not as good as he himself can do today.
That's right.
Because he's still doing it. Randy is only about 2 years older than me, so he hasn't retired yet. I don't know that he has any intention of retiring.
Good for him.
I don't intend to retire.
Good for you as well.
But the point is, what Randy did is he would, at the 14th fret on a 14th fret neck guitar, he would saw through, take that fret out, saw through the board, and using a palette knife, take the board on the body part off. That would expose the dovetail. He could pour a little bit of water into the dovetail joint and stick a soldering iron in that.
Right.
And that would heat it enough that he could work the neck out. But if you weren't careful, you could cause damage to the finish.
You can.
In the wood if you didn't do it right. And if you weren't careful using some force, you could crack the neck at the heel.
Well, he was experimenting, you know.
And when you put the neck back in, if you set it at the angle you needed, but you didn't put a shim under the board, you had this broken board look.
Yeah.
And
pretty rough looking back
then. Yeah, most of those that we see, we redo.
Right.
So that's something that when we run across that, we redo it, but that's not as bad as the so-called California neck set, which you can explain, that came before him.
Right. So the California neck reset was actually trimming up the back of the instrument and physically moving the neck back and slipping the block itself, the neck block, removing material from the back, slipping the block, and actually re-gluing the block at a different position, and it would actually change and alter the angle of the neck.
You'd also be shortening the back of the guitar.
You would shorten the back of the guitar by a little bit,
and twisting the sides.
And you're twisting the sides. It's not I don't know why that was ever really a good idea. But,
it never was a good idea, but it did. When you didn't know any better, it took a guitar from having horrific action to being temporarily at least playable. But you'd risk changing, well, you were torquing the sides in a way that was making it very prone to cracking. And you were really messing up the guitar. It was, you know, we really don't think this is ideal, but, you know, it'll make it play. It's like you got a Rolls Royce and you're in an accident and you put it together with Bondo and baling wire.
That's right. Why did they call it a California style neck reset?
Because John Lundberg was the one who started that, and he was in Berkeley, California.
There you go.
So, and others in California learned that technique, and
Right.
then it spread a bit where others around the country were doing it, but it was never a good idea.
Right. That's no longer practice. I don't know anybody that is doing that kind of neck reset nowadays, and that's been the case for some time.
Quite a while, but even the method of taking necks out at the dovetail, I think you could explain a bit about that, because it has changed substantially.
Tremendously. So, and what I find interesting as well is that there's definitely quite a few outfits around the country that we can go back a number of decades, and everyone kind of added to what we have today with regards to proper repair techniques. With Randy Wood in the late 60s, he would, like George was saying, he would saw off the extension itself, exposing the dovetail and the squeeze out pocket, which is just behind it. At that point, pouring hot water in there and figuring out how to get some movement, sloshing it around so that it can kind of loosen back up was the way to do it. And it wasn't very clean. And from what I understand, he broke quite a few neck or heels in that area, figuring out how you can torque that neck properly without breaking it takes a little bit of time. So later, as the years went on, folks said, all right, well, let me keep thinking about this, and they keep refining it. So then the next step was to actually remove a fret itself, the 14th, 15th fret, and to drill a hole right down into the dovetail or the pocket, okay, and take a steam needle itself, the same size as the hole that was now drilled, to insert that in there, whether it's one hole or two holes, and to slowly bleed that steam into it, made from a modified cappuccino machine, to get the steam into it. And then you had a little bit more control that way of taking out the neck. What I think a lot of folks found is that it can get a little messy. I actually still prefer that method myself, of using a steam needle. I have my ways of making sure that I use very little steam, and I can get most necks out in about 20-25 minutes or so without very much problems at all. Most recently, and I'd say the last maybe 5 years, the next big advancement after pouring hot water in there, the steam needle. The steam needle was used for decades, and about 5 years ago, Ian Davlin, who actually was a repair person here, worked with some folks to develop a heat rod that will take out a neck without using any water, moisture, really at all. And it's incredibly clean, and I'm proud of Ian for doing it, and it works fantastic. Interestingly enough, what I love about it is that Randy Wood has a direct connection to you. And then in-house, it was done using steam here at Gruhn Guitars for decades, still is. And then Ian, who was a repairman, who was one of your repairmen, actually developed that as well. Yet a different way of taking a neck out again. And that's one of the most beautiful things about working here at Gruhn's, is that it's a place where you work, but you also learn and you educate and teach folks around you. So I can think of many repair techniques that were really dialed in here under your roof, from Hugh Hansen to the list goes on with super famous repair folks that have worked here. And that's what I think makes this repair shop super special, is that we're constantly thinking ahead, forward thinking. How could we make this process better, cleaner, faster, better, cleaner, faster? And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
This actually goes along with a question that came in from George Kidd. Okay. He said that I was looking at your broadcast with Tom Bukovac, and I thought maybe a good webcast subject might be talk about all the now famous folks that built their careers or got their start working for you. Maybe you've already done that.
Hey, how are you?
More. And
Are.
bunch of
Suffering for your state.
So
yeah, it's trying to live through the nightmare.
but going on, like Greg was saying, Steve Gilchrist actually did work for me back in 1980. I first met him in 79, offered him a job, and he worked for me in 80. And then we had people who worked in the repair shop. John Draven went on to be a well-known luthier. Kim Walker was my shop foreman. His guitars bring bundles of money these days.
Fantastic.
He's up in Connecticut. Tom Volz, who just recently retired from Gibson, but did a great deal of design and management and quite a bit of work at Gibson. Tom Ventris worked for me, did great artwork. Marnie Lanham, still active as a repairman and builder today in Nashville. Paul McGill.
Paul McGill, yep.
Very well-known builder. Worked here.
Gilchrist.
I mentioned Gilchrist already. Ranger Doug worked in sales. Also co-wrote a book with me.
Andy Jellison, I want to make mention of him as well. He was a repairman with you for 20 some odd years. Excellent repairman.
Yeah, it's a long list.
Oh, yeah.
Pat Enright, who was the lead singer for the Nashville Bluegrass Band, worked for me packing boxes.
That's fine. That's cool.
And Ethan Pilzer worked doing data entry for incoming inventory, but he's played bass for Big and Rich and numerous others. Brent Truitt was a box packer for me after Brent Truitt, after Pat Enright, because Pat Enright recommended Brent because Brent was working a hot dog vendor cart at the corner of 4th and Church Street. And he came, but later he was playing mandolin on stage professionally with a number of artists, and now has his own recording studio.
There you go.
So I mean, it just
The list goes on. Hugh Hansen builds some fine
very
mandolins.
fine mandolins. So that's two very, Steve Gilchrist and Hugh Hansen, both extraordinary mandolin builders.
Absolutely.
But it's Alan Woody worked for me in sales, great bass player,
Yeah.
not a great salesman. Being salesman not only didn't utilize his talents as a bass player, it drove him to drink. And but when it came time later, he played bass for the Allman Brothers Band, and he played for Government Mule till the time of his unfortunate death. He just died in his sleep one night.
That's
While
right.
they were on the road, but he had cleaned up his act and was a fabulous player. But the number of people that we've had was absolutely amazing over the years, and the talent pool we have now is. But what we do on a day-to-day basis, sometimes I think it's like we're on a reality show, except the thing about all those TV reality shows is they're all staged and they ain't real. Here it's real.
That's right.
You know, right now downstairs they're doing taping for a potential movie, but Brian Sutton's downstairs being interviewed right now, and he's going to be followed by David Greer later in the afternoon. And you know, we get all kinds of people in here, just like Tommy Emmanuel mentioned earlier. He comes in frequently, and you know, our customer and our client base is a pretty amazing group of folks.
Yeah.
And our own employees, we have had some turnover over the years, but for the most part, people stay a long time.
Oh, a very long time.
And the ones who have left have typically left on very good terms
Absolutely.
and have gone on to have extremely successful careers, some playing music and others as excellent builders. And there is a different mindset between being a builder and a repairman.
Absolutely.
And I can express that, but you might add some of your own thoughts on that. See, to me, it's a great compliment if a builder has work that is so distinctive, you can look at it from across the room and it's as distinctive as a signature. It's, you know, right away, so-and-so did that. And if you can say from across the room, wow, you know, that's a Monteleone, or that's a Gilchrist, or that's a D'Angelico, or that's a John Graven, or a Kim Walker, or whatever, that can be a compliment. But for a repairman,
Not so much.
it's beyond not so much. If you can tell he was there, that's a failure.
Right.
The job is to take something that looked like an elephant stepped on it, put it back together where you can't find a single trace that you were ever there or that the elephant was ever there either.
Right.
And you have to put it back to the specs of the original builder. You have to have no evidence of your own personality. You don't improve on it over what the maker had in mind. You put it back to what the maker's intent was.
Yeah.
And, you know, the greatest repairmen don't necessarily become famous because you can't tell they were there.
Right.
Whereas the great builders, you know, in some ways it may be a bit ego deflating that if you do a phenomenal repair, the guy you do it for is really happy and he may tell a few friends about it, but often enough he doesn't.
Right.
Because he doesn't, you know, if he's going to resell the instrument, if there's no evidence that you ever fixed it, he may not tell you.
Right.
But it is a different mindset doing repairs versus being a builder.
Much, much different. You know, the greatest compliment you can ever give a repair person, and this is the word I think that we use amongst each other, is clean. It's clean work. clean. Clean is one of the biggest compliments that you can give a repair person. But builders and repair folks are wired very different. I always say that the best builders on the planet probably know how to repair as well.
They don't all, though. I can
Not
see
all.
there's some
Not
of them
all.
who can't for the life of them fix a crack where it looks good. They can build one
True.
with no cracks,
Right.
and it's great. But if you take one that has a crack in it that they themselves made, they can't fix it right.
It's very true. But the builders that I have in mind are also known for being clean, and they also happen to be pretty darn good repairmen as well, if they chose to. So that's one of the things that I've noticed over the years, especially managing the repair shop here, is that when straight builders apply for gigs with Gruhns, I have the hardest time working with them because they don't think the same way. Okay.
Also, if they are great repairmen, but they start building a few instruments just on the side for fun, if they really get to liking it, they leave.
That's right. That's right. Repair folks are wired in a certain way, and there's very little creativity when it comes to repairing. You can be creative with regards to techniques or thinking up different clamping techniques or different ways of carrying out the repair itself, but you're not really there looking at aesthetics or designing whatever it might be. That's not our job, especially here at Gruhn's, where we restore a lot of instruments. So you know what you can being able to put an instrument together in a clean way is very respectable. I think it's great. I think today with Stuart McDonald making kit guitars and just in general looking at an electric guitar, a Telecaster, for instance, it really is pretty straightforward. Most folks could, if you have some sort of skills with your hands, you can figure out how to build an electric guitar. It's not that complicated. Okay, an acoustic guitar is a bit more complicated. If you're going to go ahead and make and bend your sides and make your top and bracing and so on and so forth, both blocks, shape your neck, that's one thing. To make it incredibly fine takes a great deal of skill and experience. But most folks can hobble together some sort of acoustic instrument or some sort of acoustic box. Even if that person decides to put together a pretty amazing instrument where we would consider it to be fine, well, it would take a repair person to take it apart and put it back together. That's what repair folks do. They know how to take things apart in a mindful way, and they already know what to expect when they're going to go and put it back together. So it's just the two folks are wired in very much in different ways. I've had folks build an instrument and bring it in with their resumes to apply for a job, and I look at it and I think it's beautiful. I think the instrument might be great, but it doesn't really tell me what you're able to do and the experience that you have in the repair world. So it is very different. It is very different. Both of us sit on the board of the Guitar Craft Academy, and they have a wonderful program, and they have for some time. And that's one of the things that I was looking for the most with regards to their curriculum, on how much focus there is on repair, because that's what I need.
There's a couple of questions, several questions that come in. Martin Roberts says, I have a 1960s K162 bass. Any tips on getting the exact year of manufacture? I'm keeping it regardless. Well, a lot of those have serial numbers, and if you send us front photo, back photo, and serial number to george@guitars.com, I'll get back to you. But without that kind of information, I can't give you an answer. But with the right info, number and front and back photo, we have a pretty good chance of helping you. Chuck Dennison says, do you see any correlation between the deteriorated guitar production of the 1970s with the equal decline in the quality of music produced? Well, I don't know that I see an equal quality in the decline of the music. The fact is that there was a huge decline in quality of guitars starting in 1965 and going onward into the 70s. But some of the finest music I've ever heard in my life was created when the quality of the guitars was going to hell in a handbasket. The great folk boom, 1959 to '63, there were still some good new instruments being made, but they weren't as good as the ones, in my opinion, of the 1920s and 30s.
Sure.
But by the time the Beatles came around, quality of the instrument was still pretty good in '65, but at the beginning of the year, but by the end of the year, it was much worse for most of the companies. Leo sold Fender and the quality went down fast. Ted McCarty left Gibson and the quality went down fast. And in the early to mid '70s, it was Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, a lot of folk rock, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan. There was so many great things going on that I think from '76 onward, when the baby boomers essentially dropped out and Generation X came around, a lot of that was short duration and shallow penetration so far as the music. And I didn't like much of it.
Hey,
I'm not going to
REM
attribute that.
is very, speaking as the Gen Xer who has to break in every once in a while, REM set a whole new standard.
Well, I'm going to say that the
Thank you, sir.
quality of the new instruments and the
You're welcome.
quality of the music produced was not proportional, either inversely or conversely, whatever. I think that they were quite different. And some great music was produced at times when the quality of instruments was going downward. But, and not all the '70s was the same. The first half of the '70s was very different from the second half of the '70s.
That's right.
The music in the second half of the '70s did not much appeal to me.
But it was still very good. It was still very good.
It depends what it was. A lot of it was disco and funk and stuff that I didn't, I did not like.
And the Allman Brothers.
There was some great music, but there was also a lot of, I remember bands like Sparks, where they had a guy who had a Hitler-style mustache and he played keyboard with one hand, and I did not like that stuff. But
Didn't like his phrasing.
it comes down to, look, there was some wonderful music made at times when the instrument quality was not good, but the instruments made today are very good, and the instruments made in the golden era were sure enough very good.
I will say another thing on when Abbie Hoffman bought his first Mercedes, you know, the Smiths, REM, like Kate Hill? Anyway, the Patti Smythe. I mean, there was incredible strides in music, just as the baby boomers were starting to really settle into to bourgeoisie lifestyle.
We're in agreement.
Yeah. Well, so far as
Thank
when
you.
Joan Baez bought a Mercedes, she went to the dealer and she was wearing no shoes and a hippie type outfit, and they didn't want to even talk to her. And then she asked, "How much is it?" And they told her the price, and she whipped out the checkbook and just bought it right on the spot.
Good for her.
But at any rate,
Anyone who had to sleep with Bob Dylan.
I'll not worry too much about that. But Tony Saporito, blessed to own a 1946 Gibson LG 2X brazed, excellent player in nice shape. Many years ago, Virgil Lay, Akron, Ohio luthier, placed 2 screws on either side of the bridge, fixing it to the underneath with a block to prevent the bridge from lifting. Not being critical, I recall him giving me price options in my teenage years, and I suspect I picked the most inexpensive option. Guitar has great sound and plays wonderfully. How significant of a modification would you consider this? General impact on appraised value, and what would you do with it right now? So,
Well, wow. Yeah, what I would do is I would re-glue that bridge. I would take the 2 screws out if they're still in there.
you take that block out.
Slip the bridge, take the blocks out, go ahead and plug up the top from where the screws were.
And if the block in there, the bridge plate, if the bridge plate is damaged, it may or may not need repair.
That's right.
And if it's really far gone, we are able to do even a laminated wood and graphite bridge plate, which can fix
Right.
quite a extensive damage and improve the sound considerably, because what you're describing, putting that block on the underside, is like fixing a mute to it.
That's right. That's right.
So the sound is impacted. So it may play physically well, but it's probably putting out 50% less than it's capable of.
That's right.
So we would certainly want to undo that job.
The biggest hurdle would be how to remove those little blocks. I mean, it's easy to get if they're using hide glue or some sort of white glue.
It may not be little blocks, it says a block.
A giant block, that could be a problem. That's the hardest part. That's a pretty invasive repair. I don't want to call it a repair, but that's a pretty invasive thing to do to an instrument.
It's an invasive modification.
There you go.
It's not a repair.
Right, modification, and to to take it apart is the hardest thing to do, especially when you're working on the inside. You're going to glue it to the bridge plate. That could it could be a lot of repair work that goes into it. And but is it invasive? Well, if that block comes out fairly clean, repairs could be done pretty straightforward. It's not that big of a deal. Getting that block out.
We would expect that it may be a pain in the rear, but that we could get it out. And if it was taken out, if it was a large block, it is muting the guitar.
That's right.
And it would be something desirable to get out, because that guitar can be a very good sounding instrument. The LG2, while it typically doesn't bring as much money as the big jumbos, actually was just as well built, was a good sounding guitar, and set up properly is absolutely professional grade instrument, suitable for professional use, stage or studio. Mm-hmm. It can be a good instrument, and it is worth fixing. Rich Borrow says, it is my understanding Gibson went to laminate the tops for their higher end arch tops in the 1960s, all else being equal. Do you hear much difference between a solid carved top versus a laminated top on a hollow body arch top guitar with a mounted pickup? Well, for one, they didn't do that on their acoustic arch tops.
That's right.
They did do that on some of their electric arch tops. And they certainly did that on the backs of things like the Super 400 and the L5 and the Birdland, the ones that have the Florentine cutaway, the pointed cutaway. Many of those have what looks like a one-piece back, and that's laminate.
There you go.
When you see a center seam on the back, that's typically a solid back, not laminated. But when you see a one-piece back, or at least what looks like a one-piece back on the outside of a 17 or 18-inch wide guitar, you can be pretty darn sure that is a laminated back, because the way they do laminates is they take a log and they spin it, and you can get huge sheets.
That's right.
You can do an 18-inch wide back that looks like a one-piece with laminate wood, but if you are actually doing solid wood construction, you're not going to be cutting 18-inch wide pieces of maple. You're going to be doing that with a center seam.
Got it.
But here's one that I haven't encountered. This is a new one on me for Greg and George. From the number 9 black tops. I want to fabricate a Bigsby vibrato as a door handle at my house, but my wife is shooting it down. Any advice to convince her that it's a great idea?
It is a great idea.
You guys are great. Keep up the great work.
He's awesome.
How do you do this?
A Bigsby vibrato as a door handle. We could figure that out. I mean,
I guess you can set it up. It's got the.
I would fix the arm. I would fix the arm to the unit itself, and then figure out how to take the unit to go ahead and screw.
Yeah, you can get the unit, and then you fix it.
Yeah.
You put the Bigsby unit, the base plate, on the door,
right,
and then you fix the handle where it goes to the door handle. It's absolutely doable.
It's very doable, yeah.
But I'd never thought of that.
I think it's a great idea.
But it's, why not?
Why not? But you don't want it to act like a mechanical vibrato. Definitely fix it. Fix the spring to it.
But you can fix it where it'll be a perfectly normal lever door handle. And my cats would know how to work it.
There you go.
If they see you do it once, they'll know how.
There you go.
But that's because they're hybrid servals and they're smarter than the domestic. But kitty cats could learn to do that. They can't do round doorknobs because they don't have opposable thumbs, but they can sure do lever door handles. And this would work. It's absolutely doable.
It is.
And the worst that could possibly happen is you mess up a door, and doors got hinges that you just take it off and you put on a new door.
There you go.
But how much can you mess up?
Nah, it's not going to be messed up. I
It'll
think you should
work.
You should do it and send us photographs.
Yeah.
I love it.
And we'll even post them if you send them.
Yes.
Because it absolutely is doable. There's no reason why it shouldn't work. And yeah. And George Kidd also had another part of the question. He'd been thinking about my 3 generations of purchasing groups, where I was talking about how the younger baby boomers are still buying, and the millennials born starting 1980 and now 41 years old, as well as their children, are buying. And he says that Fender's research shows that the biggest predictor of future guitar purchases is having a positive experience playing your first guitar. That's one reason they focus on providing online lessons. Subsequent guitar purchases are driven by people's improvements in an enjoyment of playing the guitar. That makes sense to me, and it's supported by third-party research. My recollection of what Fender said is that the average number of guitars a player who has had a positive initial experience is 5 to 7 guitars plus amps, pedals, t-shirts, etc.
Well,
and I do think that I all too often encounter folks who've been taking lessons for a year and they haven't been taught how to compose anything, how to pick a tune by ear. They can't improvise their way out of a wet paper bag, and they're bored and unhappy. And there's a high dropout rate with guitar students from that first lesson through the second month. They don't ever get far enough to get over just that initial sense of feeling sort of helpless. Your fingers haven't developed calluses yet on the fingertips. If you can't get to the point where you're physically comfortable playing it and having at least a little bit of fun, if all they give you is rote memorization and you're studying chord charts and chord forms and music theory, I mean, that's all important, but you can start with something so much simpler. And it gets back to my experience, my one and only experience teaching a guitar class in 1965. I got a call at school. I was at University of Chicago, and Fred Shop called. Pete said that Carmi Simon's out sick today, and he's teaching it. There's a class scheduled for an hour and a half from now. There's 10 kids coming. They're beginners. And I know you've only been playing for a couple of years, but they've only been playing for less than 6 months now. You should be able to teach them. I'll give you $10. And $10 in 1965 was equivalent to more than 100 today. So I said, okay, I went. I skipped the class. And I said, hi, kids. Carmi's out sick today. I'm George. I'm going to fill in. Show me what you've been doing. And they showed me these pretty little arpeggios they'd been doing that I couldn't do, but I still knew how to play chords in the key of C and play a melody line, Carter family style. I said, well, have any of you ever used a flat pick? Nope, they had. I said, great. We're going to hand out 10 flat picks, 1 per student. So I'm going to show you how to hold it. There it is. Got it. And you guys know the chords in the key of C. Yep, they did. You ever played a tune before where you just could hum a tune and pick it out? Nope. Never showed you anything like that? Nope. Nope. All they had was each lesson gave you an exercise, and your job was to learn how to repeat that exercise. It wasn't the tune. None of them had played a full tune yet. It was just exercises. And I said, well, we're going to do something different. And so I got out a guitar, and here's a guitar that's not too expensive. No reason to show how to be a beginner on a $10,000 guitar. So here's a Martin DSS 17. This is a guitar that's $1,559, brand new. Back just a little bit. And anyway, key of C, you got the chords for the key of C, really simple. C, G7, F, and alternating bass, they'd never done that. But every one of them was able to do it quick. Hammer-ons, nobody'd ever mentioned them to these folks. They got that pretty quick. And then, as far as just doing a simple scale, you know how to do that? Well, some of them did and some of them didn't. Because they've been just given memorization, but they never bothered to do a scale. So I said, now, if you can do that, if you can hum a tune, you can play it. And by the end of the 1 hour lesson, 6 out of the 10 kids were able to pick out tunes by ear with no trouble at all. And they were starting to even compose tunes. They were excited. They were happy. I left 4 who weren't happy because I didn't give them a rote memorization exercise. But I can also pretty well tell you that those 4 were never going to learn to play guitar anyway. But the 6, they were special, and they were going to do well. And probably by the end of the 1 year, they very well might have been playing better than I do now. But because kids are at that formative age when they learn fast. But if you can make lessons fun, you can start out giving them a good experience. It's not just giving them lessons. Because I remember junior high, I played cello in the junior high band. The lessons I had from the original band leader was he was trying to teach every instrument, which he couldn't do well. And then they later sent me to a teacher who was downtown. My mom would take me down there, and he was German. He was a very strict disciplinarian. You had to do it his way or no way. And he made it anything but fun. And lessons have to be informative and fun. And the fact is, you can start out on guitar and play tunes remarkably quickly, just like you can on piano. Some instruments like violin are actually very difficult to sound good at, because even though there's only 4 strings and the tuning itself is simple, where you could play it on a mandolin fairly easily, getting good tone on a violin requires expert use of both left and right hand, and the intonation is something that may take a really good ear. But even if you have a pretty good ear, learning the vibrato and the bowing technique and the left and right hand techniques and coordinating it all, just simply playing one good sounding note on a violin is actually very difficult.
Agreed.
And playing a good sounding note on the piano, even somebody who doesn't know how can hit one note, bang, it sounds like, the difference between Rachmaninoff and somebody who's a rank amateur hitting one note is not all that great. But in the hands of the right player, a piano, of course, is an amazing instrument. But at any rate, guitar can be fun. And we've managed to spend over an hour already
Chatting, yeah.
Keep in mind, we're not going to be doing a show presentation next week. We will the following week. In the meantime, if there's anybody's questions that we didn't get around to, email me, george@guitars.com, and I will give you a personal response. And regardless of whether we have a session next week or not, if you have questions that you have a burning desire to hear an answer to, by all means, let us know. And William, by the way, says Charlie Louvin's book, his book, Satan is Real, he talked about how Ira would smash his mandolin from time to time and would pick up the pieces and reassemble it. According to the book, his repairs would be nearly invisible. Did you ever come across one of Ira's smashed and repaired mandolins? And the answer is yes, I have. And the way that his repairs would be invisible would be if you were nearly blind and had thick glasses instead of Coke bottle lenses. So anyway, so much for that. Goodbye till 2 weeks from now.
Take care.